After many days of job hunting, I finally found one. It might not have been the best, but financial necessity pushed me to accept a job as a cemetery watchman. So without hesitation, I ventured into this new phase of my life. On the day I arrived, I saw the hat. An old blacktop hat rested atop the head of an angel statue at the cemetery's entrance. They had warned me about the man with the hat, a mysterious and spectral figure who had guarded these sacred grounds before my arrival. However, I always thought people said it to scare me. I was never a superstitious person, so I didn't take what people said at face value. That changed one day, as night fell and I walked among the moss-covered stone graves. My flashlight cast dancing shadows on the tombstones. The echo of my footsteps resounded in the stillness of the night, a stillness only broken by the crackling of branches and the occasional fluttering of a nocturnal bird. Then I saw it, the blacktop hat moving among the graves. A sudden chill swept over me, deeper than any cold of the night. I followed the figure from a distance. Its intangible silhouette floated above the ground instead of walking. It seemed to be searching for something, occasionally pausing to read a tombstone. For a moment, I thought it was a prank, or simply an illusion. But deep down, I knew there was more to this occurrence. When the figure reached the tombstone of a child who had died many years ago, the shadow of the hat seemed to bow almost in reverence. Without realizing it, my own body mirrored the action. I bowed to the child, and then to the man with the hat. Clearly, there was a connection at that moment. I didn't fully understand what was happening, so little by little, I started to believe in the existence of that man with the hat. I even confirmed it when, one day, a woman visited her relative's grave and asked me if the man with the hat no longer worked at the cemetery, as he had always greeted them with an eerie yet familiar presence. It's true that every cemetery has stories to tell, as the restless souls there exist and seek eternal peace. However, the constant presence of that man with the hat had become a legendary reality, known by everyone in the area. Many claimed that he was a man who, in life, had suffered a catastrophic accident with his son who had died. Each night, he would come to the cemetery, burdened with the guilt over his child's death. Other stories told a similar version, except in this one, the man had also died, but couldn't find eternal rest. So, his spirit wandered throughout the cemetery. Hundreds of stories and legends abounded, yet their truth was unclear. Nonetheless, from that moment, I recognized the need to respect the man, given my limited understanding of the unfolding events. I realized that he might not be a threat, but a guardian, consistently ensuring that those who rested here were never alone. Nevertheless, I couldn't fully trust the rumors. My days and nights became routine, always accompanied by the mysterious figure of the man with the hat. In the stillness of the night, I found comfort in his presence. At times, I felt like the hat was watching me, as if it knew that I, too, had now become a guardian. One night, the moon was partially bright, and I saw the man with the hat clearly for the first time. There was no face beneath that hat, only darkness. But in his ghostly hand, he held a withered rose. He gently placed it on the tombstone of someone recently buried and walked away. Although the presence of the man with the hat often brought me a sense of companionship and comfort, there were nights when his aura seemed to change, becoming darker, more unsettling. During these times, the cemetery felt colder and gloomier, and the moon seemed to hide behind the clouds, as if afraid to reveal what was happening in the darkness. One night, as I walked a secluded path in the cemetery, I spotted the man with the hat in front of an ancient tomb. His shoulders seemed stiffer, the darkness beneath the hat even deeper. I watched as he bent down and appeared to slide a hand across the stone door, almost with affection, almost with resentment. An intense cold spread through the place, and a feeling of unease took hold of me. In the following nights, I began to notice patterns. The figure of the man with the hat grew darker when he visited certain graves. At each grave, A distinct chill and creeping unease ran up my spine. These were the resting places of individuals whose lives, according to records, were marked by evil and disgrace. In his presence, the darkness seemed to close in more tightly. The man with the hat appeared to be a reflection of the souls he guarded. One night, under a full moon, the usual routine at the cemetery was disrupted. I walked, as usual, watching the shadows dance in the cold moonlight when I saw him. The dark figure of the man with the hat was standing next to an ancient crypt, larger and more ornate than the others. The atmosphere around him was darker, his presence more powerful. I approached, guided by curiosity and duty. However, before I could get too close, the man with the hat suddenly turned towards me, sending a chill down my spine and instilling a real sense of threat for the first time. The darkness extending from his figure seemed filled with anger and warning. An invisible force pushed me back, almost knocking me to the ground. A cold, whispering wind seemed to whisper, "Stay away." The message was clear, and though no words were spoken, the warning echoed in my mind. The crypt was off limits to me. Though terrified, I couldn't abandon my post. I kept my distance but stayed in place, watching as the man with the hat returned to his silent vigil. It was an unsettling night, filled with shadows and whispers. Weeks passed after the incident at the crypt, but a more tangible fear soon crept into my life. One night, I retreated to my room in the small cabin beside the cemetery. Sleep quickly carried me into a deep rest. However, in the dead of the night, a chilling cold woke me. I opened my eyes to find a shadow looming over me, the darkness beneath the hat. The man with the hat was in my room, his figure grotesquely projected by the pale moonlight streaming through the window. The air felt thick with menace, and a primal terror gripped me. The shadow towered over my bed like a dark angel waiting for the right moment. I could feel the violence in the air, a silent promise of death. My body froze, unable to move, and my breathing became shallow. At that moment, I knew I was facing death. The shadow leaned in, and I felt its cold hand reaching for my chest. Just as I thought it was the end, a golden light started glowing from the small medallion around my neck. It was a relic from my mother, supposedly blessed by a saint. The light seemed to stop the man with the hat. His hand withdrew, and the figure stood upright, its silhouette wavering between light and darkness. The hat turned, moved toward the door, and faded into the shadows before vanishing completely from my room. My breath returned, shallow and shaky, after what felt like an eternity. I crawled out of my bed, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The next day, all I could think about was resigning. I was utterly drained, worn down to the point of madness, and constantly haunted by the presence of that man in my life. But once my mind cleared, I knew I couldn't be swayed by such fears. Despite the terror of that night, I maintained my post, understanding the cemetery needed a watchman who respected both the living and the dead. But I also realized there were lines I shouldn't cross, secrets that needed to remain buried, and forces beyond my understanding that I had to honor. My relationship with the man with the hat changed after that night. I no longer saw him as just a silent companion on my watch, but as a powerful and dangerous entity. It wasn't until one night that everything became clear. The dark figure stood next to the small gravestone of the child he used to honor. His silence seemed to invite a conversation that had long been overdue. As I drew closer, a wave of emotions overwhelmed me, and I understood that I was about to witness the story of the man with the hat. Though no words were spoken, the images and feelings he conveyed were so powerful. They felt like whispers carried on the night wind. I saw a man of flesh and blood, dressed in a 19th century suit with his characteristic hat. He had a kind face, though marked by the scars of life, and in his eyes was an infinite sadness. The man stood beside a boy, his son, laughing and playing in a sunlit meadow on a summer day, as if a movie were springing to life right before my eyes. Suddenly, the scene shifted. A horrific accident, an out-of-control carriage, panic on their faces. Both were snatched from life in an instant, leaving behind only pain and regret. In the final scene, I saw the man and his son buried in this very cemetery, their grave adorned with wilted flowers and the tears of those left behind. In the last image, the man with the hat seemed to bow towards the small gravestone. The sorrow radiating from him was almost tangible, a silent lament that echoed in the stillness of the cemetery. I then understood that the man with the hat was not just a guardian, but also a tormented spirit, condemned to wander the cemetery in search of an eternal rest that eluded him. His love for his son and his guilt over failing to protect him had tethered him to this place, transforming him into the cemetery's eternal watchman. Those stories that once seemed ridiculous to me were real. It was obvious that cemeteries have a rich history to tell, as there are souls that still do not find eternal rest, like the man with the hat. Without a doubt, that man had the ability to captivate me with his thoughts, for somehow I could feel his desires clearer than before. It was a plea, a desperate need for release. Eternity had worn him down, and his soul longed for rest. Yet, he was trapped, unable to leave the cemetery and his son. His plea resonated with me. Although unsure how to help, I felt a strong determination. I would dedicate myself to finding a way to free the man with the hat, to help him obtain the eternal rest he so deeply desired. I began to research, read ancient texts, and search through old records. I discovered stories of trapped spirits and rituals of liberation. Each night, after my rounds, I sat by the child's gravestone and read aloud, hoping that the man with the hat would hear. Weeks and months passed, and although I was unsure of any effect, I could not give up. I owed it to this man who, despite his terrifying nature, had been my companion in the lonely watch of the cemetery. His cry filled the air, an expression of profound sadness and regret that pierced my heart. I stayed there, watching him, at a loss for how to comfort a tormented spirit. Every night I returned to the crypt and found him there, his crying a constant reminder of his eternal pain. I couldn't understand why he remained there, unable to find the peace he so desperately sought. He spoke no words, but none were needed. In his crying, I could feel the anguish of losing his son, the guilt of not being able to protect him, and the remorse of not being there in his final moments. It was an emotional shock that left me paralyzed. But despite my fear, I also felt compassion, because although the man with the hat was a fearsome figure, he was also a father who had lost his son, a man trapped in his sadness. I decided to take a risk, and every night I sat beside him, silently sharing his pain, offering only my presence and empathy. I hoped it might somehow bring him some comfort. Over time, I began to notice a change in myself. An inexplicable fatigue began to settle in. A deep tiredness that sleep did not alleviate. My thoughts became increasingly slow, my movements increasingly heavy. Before long, I realized it wasn't just physical exhaustion, it was something deeper, a force draining my energy and leaving me hollow. Reflecting on this, I uncovered a chilling truth. The energy appeared to be linked to the man with the hat. Each time I sat by his side, each time I shared his pain, it felt as though a part of me was fading away, absorbed by the desolation of his spirit. His pain, his guilt, seemed so powerful that they were consuming my own energy, leaving me worn out and weakened. It was clear that I couldn't continue like this. I had to find a way to protect myself, to preserve my energy while trying to help the man with the hat. I began searching the ancient text, looking for some type of defense or barrier that I could employ. After days of searching, I found a series of protection rituals. They were complicated, requiring various elements and considerable concentration, but I was willing to try. I couldn't afford to be completely drained, not if I wanted to continue helping the man with the hat. I carried out the ritual on the next full moon, invoking protection and strength to resist the energy drain. Upon finishing, I felt a calming sense of protection envelop me. The pain of the man with the hat was strong, and although I could withstand it, I did not want to find myself in the same situation again. I resolved to keep searching for ways to help the man with the hat without sacrificing my own energy. I did what I could, studying more texts, searching for other rituals, and trying different approaches to alleviate his pain. But nothing seemed to work. Each night, his crying continued, his pain as palpable as ever. A feeling of helplessness began to weigh on me, and combined with my exhaustion, I felt increasingly desperate. One night, as I sat next to his son's tombstone, I finally came to the conclusion I had been avoiding. I couldn't continue like this. I couldn't keep sacrificing my own health in a futile attempt to help the man with the hat, my heart filled with sadness and regret. But I knew I had to accept the truth. I stood up, giving one last look at the child's tombstone. I felt great sorrow for the man with the hat and his son, and my decision to give up seemed like a betrayal. But I also knew I had reached my limit. I couldn't go on like this. Filled with deep sadness, I walked away from the tombstone. I headed towards the old mausoleum, where I normally spent my nights. But that night, I simply passed by. I couldn't bear the idea of hearing the sobs of the man with the hat, not when I couldn't do anything to help him. In the days and weeks that followed, I avoided the area of the cemetery where the man with the hat was located. I continued with my duties, keeping the cemetery clean and tidy, but with a sense of grief that did not fade. Sometimes, during the quietest nights, I could still hear the faint crying of the man with the hat, a constant reminder of my failure. But as much as it weighed on me, I knew I had made the right decision. I couldn't help him, not without risking my health. Although it was painful, I learned a valuable lesson. Not all tormented souls can be saved, and not all pains can be alleviated. Sometimes the only option is to accept reality and take care of oneself, as hard as it may be. Eventually, I resigned from my job and never returned to that cemetery, which left me with a sad taste. I knew that man was aware of me, but I never heard from him or the story again, although I assumed he continued to be a tormented soul, roaming all the tombstones in search of a solution that would lead him to eternal rest.